The Ghost Soldier of Makurdi. The night was eerily silent in the outskirts of Makurdi, Benue State. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen, something unspoken. Sarah and her 3 sons sat outside the family compound, waiting. The glow of a flickering kerosene lamp cast long shadows on the cracked walls, and the rhythmic chirping of crickets was the only sound in the night. Tanko had promised he'd be back in a few minutes. Hours had passed. The village was asleep, but Tanko was nowhere to be found. A desperate plea. Months later, in early 2018, Sarah sat before a panel of military officials. Desperation written all over her face. My husband Tanko is missing. He was declared AWOL, but I know something isn't right. We've been married for 17 years. We have 3 sons together, she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. At first, the officers dismissed her. AWOL soldiers were not uncommon. But Sarah persisted. He loved the military. He would never just disappear. Then she pulled out her phone and scrolled through pictures. There was Tanko standing in uniform, his rank displayed proudly on his chest. Another photo. Tanko celebrating his youngest son's birthday just last year. The officers frowned, confused. One of them, an older commander, leaned forward and asked, "How long did you say you've been married to him?" 17 years, Sarah replied. The room fell silent. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, the commander let out a long breath before muttering, "That's impossible. A soldier who shouldn't exist." Tanko had always been passionate about the military. He had tried multiple times to get into the Nigerian Defense Academy, but fate never favored him. He eventually enlisted in the army through another route, and according to his records, he served diligently for years. But there was one problem. Tanko had died in a motor accident in 2004. He was buried by his grieving family in Makurdi. Yet Sarah swore she had been with him for years. Beyond that, Sarah's mind raced. This had to be a mistake. Someone else must have the same name. But when she showed them another picture, one from their wedding day in 2001, the air in the room grew cold. The officer stood up abruptly. "Where did you say he went missing?" "The trip to Makurdi." Sarah had always wondered why Tanko never talked about his family. He had avoided conversations about his past, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. He never introduced her or their children to any relatives. But after years of pressing him, he finally relented. In February 2018, Tanko agreed to take them to Makurdi. The journey was long but filled with excitement. Sarah and the boys looked forward to meeting their extended family. When they arrived at the entrance of the family compound, Tanko stopped. He seemed uneasy, shifting his weight from one foot to another. "You and the boys go inside," he said, avoiding her gaze. "I need to see someone. I'll be back in a few minutes." Sarah watched as he turned and walked away, his silhouette disappearing into the darkening sky. She thought nothing of it. Then she knocked on the compound's heavy wooden door. A mother's horror. An elderly woman, her eyes filled with years of grief, answered the door. When she saw Sarah standing there with 3 boys, her expression was one of confusion. But when her gaze landed on the youngest child, her breath caught in her throat. The boy was the spitting image of her late son. "Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice shaking. Sarah smiled warmly. "Mama, I'm Tanko's wife. These are his children." The woman's frail hands trembled. "What did you say?" she whispered. "We came with him. He told us to come inside while he went to see someone. He should be back soon." The old woman collapsed onto a chair, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Other family members gathered around, staring at Sarah and the children with wide eyes. A younger man stepped forward and asked, "Which Tanko are you talking about?" "My husband," Sarah replied. "Your brother, Tanko." A thick silence followed. Then someone finally spoke. "Tanko died 17 years ago. He was buried right here in Makurdi." Sarah laughed nervously. No, there must be some mistake. "Here, look." She pulled out her phone again, scrolling through more pictures. Tanko in uniform, Tanko at her eldest son's graduation. The air inside the room became suffocating. Tanko's mother let out a broken wail, covering her face with her hands. "You've been living with a ghost." The haunting truth. Sarah ran outside, screaming Tanko's name. But the night swallowed her cries. For 4 days, they waited. No sign of Tanko, no messages, no calls, nothing. Sarah and the children returned to Kaduna, but she could not rest. The military launched an investigation. They spoke to Tanko's colleagues, but the more they searched, the more disturbing the truth became. Fellow officers described him as the perfect soldier, one who never slept, who always volunteered for the night shift. They loved him for it, but now they wondered, was he ever truly alive? His records existed, but his history before 2004 was a blank slate. How could a man who had been buried in Makurdi serve in the army for years after his death? A final goodbye. Determined to find answers, Sarah returned to Makurdi with a journalist investigating paranormal stories. Together, they visited Tanko's grave. The tombstone was weathered but intact. That night, Sarah had a dream. She was back in their home, and Tanko stood before her, dressed in his uniform, looking as real as he ever had. "I couldn't leave," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I had to serve. But now I am tired. Let me rest." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was afraid," he admitted. "I wanted a life, a family. But the dead cannot stay among the living forever." The next morning, Sarah and the village priest held a quiet prayer at his grave, asking for his soul to finally find peace. And from that day on, there were no more sightings of Tanko. The mystery remains. Was Tanko a ghost, a man whose spirit refused to rest until he fulfilled his dream of serving in the military? Or was there something even more sinister at play? What do you think? Was this the work of a restless spirit? Or was there a darker secret buried in the sands of Makurdi? Do you believe in ghosts? Let us know in the comments.